Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. If you want it, come and get some. Because we love wisdom. Because we love wisdom.
People in every part of the globe are perishing because the judgment is low. From children to teens to elderly folks, this epidemic is incredibly bold. Wisdom is needed to see through the fog. Without it, we'll stumble and see to the long. You're jumping without something to break and fall if you choose to ignore this beckoning call. The only people who will lose the war are those who don't know who they're fighting for. You are the only one who can decide your fate. Don't waste your life when you can live inside of grace. If we turn to God and behold the shining face, we will gain traction to run in this human race.
Hey, what's going on? JC Johnson here for The Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And today we are discussing the wisdom of intellectualism. More on that after this.
Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. If you want it, come and get some. Because we love wisdom. Because we love wisdom. Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. If you want it, come and get some. Because we love wisdom. Because we love wisdom.
Hey, what's going on? JC Johnson here for The Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And we are live at North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. We're here every Thursday from 4 to 6. Glad you could tune in and hang out with me. So during the last show, we discussed the wisdom of agapism. And agapism basically is talking about how everything that we do ultimately should be motivated by love. That should be our goal. Whenever we speak with people, whatever we do, we should be motivated by love. And if you missed that episode, no worries, because it will be available as a podcast, so you'll be able to hear it again later. You can always listen to any past episodes as a podcast online. You can get that on iTunes if you have an iPhone or you have an iPad or anything like that, or even a Mac computer. You'll be able to listen to it on iTunes, or you can hear it on Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. You can hear it on Google Play Music. And if you have an Amazon Alexa device, you can just say, Alexa, play For the Love of Wisdom, and you'll be able to pull up the show hands-free. That's something that, I know some people who prefer listening to it that way. All you have to do is just, speak to the device and it'll pull it right up. And some people are not as, they're not as technologically savvy. So that can definitely make things easier too. So they don't have to actually search for it. But it is pretty easy to find. Even if you do a Google search, you'll be able to find the show. So you can get that online. And also don't forget to check out the newest releases from One Plan Media LLC. One is a book called The 40-Day Fire. This is actually a book that I wrote that I just released at the beginning of January. It's called The 40-Day Fire, Burning Away All That Does Not Resemble Your Destiny. And you can get that in various formats. You can get that as an ebook or a paperback or hardback. But right now, if you've never had Audible before, you can actually download the audiobook version of this book for free. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/lovewisdom, and you'll be able to actually download that for free. So since today we're speaking about intellectualism, again, if you want to join the conversation, you can hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. You can follow me there. Either place, just look for @OnePlanMedia, and that's 1-ONE Plan Media. All right, and you can also interact with me on Facebook as well, whichever social media sites you prefer, and we can continue the conversation that way. I'm going to be posting some clips of this episode and other ones on there as well. So if you want to comment about it or anything, definitely feel free to leave something in the comment section, and we can keep the conversation going. All right, so last time we talked about agapism. Now we're focusing on intellectualism. What does it mean to be an intellectual, right? Sometimes we think, okay, an intellectual is just this person with this huge head, right? They just seem to know it all or whatever, right? But what is an intellectual in reality, right? So an intellectual is this is according to the Merriam Webster's dictionary. An intellectual is developed or chiefly guided by the intellect, meaning their mind, rather than by emotion or experience. So this is a person who's rational. This is a person who's not just making decisions because of how they feel in the moment, but they make decisions based upon what they believe is the best thing in the long run. Also, an intellectual is somebody who is given to study, reflection, and speculation. So this is a person who's not just saying their opinion without first, doing some research, right? This is a person that's actually, they want to make sure that what they're saying is accurate and that it's true and that it's meaningful. So this is a person that doesn't want to just say anything, but they want to say something that's a reflection of their time and study. And also an intellectual is someone who's engaged in activity requiring the creative use of the intellect. So this is someone who's exercising their mental muscles, so to speak, so that they can, continue to grow, continue to just be in environments where they're stimulated, where their mind is stimulated. And just intellectualism, just in general, intellectualism is devotion to the exercise of intellect or to intellectual pursuits. So that could be a wide range of things, whatever a person is interested in or they need to study for whatever reason. Intellectualism is just the act of doing that, putting yourself in an environment where you can learn and grow, be intellectually stimulated. There's an article here we're gonna get into in a moment, and it talks about intellectuals. It says, intellectuals, who are they? And this is from Psychology Today. It was just published a couple weeks ago, and I think it's a pretty good article. We're gonna get into that because I think it will help to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about today. But also, if you're new to the show, if this is your first time listening, just as a reminder, this show is really all about philosophy, and it's done in a different kind of way, though. It's not just done in a way like a college professor would lecture about philosophy and going into all of the Eastern philosophies and Western philosophies and stuff like that. But it's non-academic in that way, that it's more so just looking at everyday topics that we can all relate to, that we can all understand, and looking at how we can gain a better understanding of that and apply whatever we learn to our lives, because that's what this is about. That's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this not only for you as a listener, but also for myself, because I want to grow myself. I want to challenge myself to become more knowledgeable in different areas. So that's pretty much what this is about, because wisdom is about having the ability to discern different things. It's the having the ability to discern relationships, situations, the ability to understand your own self. And the show title comes from two Greek words. The first one is philo, or philo, which basically means love, and that's where the word Philadelphia comes from. So if you've ever been to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love. And the reason why it's called that is because Philadelphia, that name actually comes from this Greek word philo, which means love. And the second part, Sophia or sophos, because the Greek word for philosophy is philosophia. That part sophos, it means wisdom. So when you put the two words together, philo, sophos, it means philosophy or love of wisdom. So that's where the title of the show comes from. That's why it's called For the Love of Wisdom. And a theme verse that I really like, that I think applies to the show, is from Psalm 90 verse 12, and it says, "Teach us to number our days carefully, so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts." All right, so that's what it's all about. And on this particular series that we're in right now for the second season, each of the words that we're discussing, they end with ism or ism. That is what we're doing during the first season. Each of the show titles ended with an ity. That was the suffix then. And a suffix basically is just the last part of a word, in contrast to a prefix, which is the letters at the beginning of a word. So next season we're gonna have a totally different theme, so look out for that. But we're about to take a quick break. You're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. I'm your host, JC Johnson. Right, welcome back. You're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets, and I'm your host, JC Johnson. So glad you can hang out with me this afternoon as we're discussing a really interesting topic. We're talking about the wisdom of intellectualism, right? And again, I mentioned before the break that being an intellectual is not just about being somebody, this real stuffy person, just with a huge head that just has their head so high in the clouds that they can't even see other human beings around them, and somebody that has all the answers. No, that's not what being an intellectual is about. It's just about really making decisions and doing things based upon reason, based on rationality, really having thought things through. There's an article that I would like to take a look at, and it was written by Dr. Makdumi, and it's called "Intellectuals, Who Are They?" And this was published not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago. And it says here that, beginning with a very simplistic version of an intellectual, Noam Chomsky says anybody who is materially established on a basic level and thus has the luxury of thinking about matters beyond basic survival of themselves is an intellectual. Okay, so again, we're going into what we were discussing earlier, which is, being an intellectual. It doesn't mean you have to have a PhD. It doesn't mean that you are, lecturing people, or you have 50 books out, right? Being an intellectual, again, this is somebody, like this says, someone who is materially established on a basic level and has the luxury of thinking about matters beyond basic survival of themselves. So this is somebody who's willing to think of things beyond the status quo, or what maybe the average person would just think about it. They're really trying to have a better understanding of something, because ultimately they know that having that knowledge is going to benefit them and probably benefit society really as a whole, if they can grasp that. So there's plenty of intellectuals who have lived throughout time. Albert Einstein is I would say somebody who plenty of people would probably consider to be an intellectual. He said something really interesting though, and he said intellectuals solve problems, geniuses prevent them. And I thought that was really interesting that he said that, because again, we're going to get into this a little bit more, but when it comes to intellectualism, the danger that a lot of people run into is they're just thinking for the sake of thinking, and sometimes it's too late. Sometimes, like Albert Einstein said, they're thinking about how to solve a problem that's something that has already happened, whereas a genius, in contrast, is looking to prevent something from ever happening so that it never has to be solved. So that's just something to keep in mind there. In the article from Dr. Makdumi, it also says, speaking of Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky, if you're not familiar, is a major figure in analytic philosophy and one of the founders of the field of cognitive science. All right, so Noam Chomsky said that intellectuals can be put into two different categories. The first category of intellectuals is, people who are value-oriented. So value-oriented intellectuals pose a challenge to the authority and are called anarchists, right? So that's one kind of intellectual, somebody who is, fighting against the establishment, or kind of like the band Rage Against the Machine. It's like they're fighting against that corporate structure, or just that political structure that they don't agree with. Then you have, on the other hand, you have technocratic and policy-oriented intellectuals who are called quote-unquote responsible intellectuals by their governments. Okay, so these are people who are not trying to challenge authority. These are people who more so help to keep people in line and help other people to not challenge authority, but to obey whatever the rules are and stuff. And I think that they're I think both kinds of intellectuals in that case are important, because there are times when you do need to stand up, especially if you're standing up against injustice. You're speaking out against things that aren't right, things that you notice in society that need to change. There's a time for that, and then again, there's also a time to maintain order. There's a time to inspire people, not to rebel, because not every circumstance calls for rebellion. Just like not every circumstance calls for just sitting down and overlooking obvious injustices. So I think that a true intellectual is not somebody who is only value oriented or someone who is only technocratic and policy oriented, but I think somebody that has a good combination of the two, who knows when to speak up and when not to. So that's a really interesting article. If you want to read the full article, I would definitely recommend doing that. You can look that up. It's called Intellectuals, Who Are They? And the subtitle for that is Anybody Keeping Knowledge as Secret or Playing Safe Is Not. It's a pretty interesting article there. So we're going to also take a look at some things that other people have said, just like Albert Einstein, as I mentioned before, who said intellectuals solve problems, geniuses prevent them. I think that it's really important to go into not just having knowledge, but the importance of knowing what to do with it and to really do something powerful, something that doesn't just make you look smart, right? But something that is beneficial to society, something that everyone needs. It's about being a visionary, being innovative. Roxanne Gay said this: public intellectuals are often put in the position of having their words, no matter how off the cuff, treated as doctrine. Okay, so what is she saying here? You know, one thing that she's saying, and I think that this is really important, I'm glad that she said that. Sometimes people will think, okay, well, this person, because they're an intellectual, because they know better, or they should know better, this is somebody who we should blindly follow, right? Because this is a person that seems to have all the answers. But this is how people get in situations where they're being ruled by dictators. You know, they're being ruled by people who have their own agenda, such as, you know, somebody like Adolf Hitler. You know, people followed him because they thought he was a good leader. They thought that he had a lot of good ideas, and that he was a person who was able to see what the problems in Germany and throughout Europe were. But what they didn't realize is that his agenda wasn't something good. It was actually something evil. But this is the problem when people don't think for themselves, but they allow other people to think for them. That's how they get caught up in bad situations. They end up following something that's destructive. You know, and it took several years, I think, for people to realize that his agenda of destruction was not something that's good. And by that time, it was kind of too late. He had already, you know, taken over. Whereas if people had challenged some of these ideas from the beginning, you know, maybe things like the Holocaust never, you know, would have been able to happen if people had understood that these ideas were not good. But that's why we need to hold people accountable, regardless of how smart or intellectual they seem to be. But more on that after this. You are listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you.
Spirit of God is the beginning of wisdom. If you want it, come and get some. Because we love wisdom. Because we love wisdom. Spirit of God is the beginning